Good evening, everybody, and thank you all for coming. I thought I'd do something a little different for this program. So I'm going to take you through a year or two in the life of a gardener and show you the inception and the evolution of my current garden. So my name is Robin Lency, and I garden in Zone 6 in Burlington, Connecticut. I have a YouTube channel called, what else? Let's Talk Gardening with Robin, go figure. I have degrees in horticulture and garden design from Berkshire Botanical Gardens. And degrees in interior design and psychology. That helps. I've been designing gardens for as long as I can remember, and my love of plants is from my mom, who loved popping in some impatiens here and there and everywhere. And my photography influence, it was from my dad, who was an avid photographer all his life. Oops. When I look back on the videos that I've been doing, I can't believe how much this garden has changed. We'll look at how I use some basic interior and garden design principles, as well as color theory to create a garden that is intertwined with color explosions and architectural structures spanning months of viewing interest. A lot of planning goes into garden design, and there are many things to consider since we all know gardens are never stagnant, but a constant work in progress. So this one's no different. As gardeners, we're always learning. Now, this is not going to be a detailed landscape design class, but I just want to show you what you can do with a little planning. When creating a garden, whether for myself or a client, I start with the function of the space. Just like inside, a space must function for your intended use. Also, are there problems that need to be solved? Each property has its own challenges to consider. You can start your design by collecting inspiration photos, whether you do that on your computer, your phone, Pinterest, whatever works for you. The famous gardener Gertrude Jekyll, whom I greatly admire, often said, use plants with careful selection and definite intention. Now, that doesn't mean you need to plan every last plant beforehand, but think about each plant's requirements before you pop it in the ground. The old saying of right plant, right place is popular for a reason. Does it want water, full sun, full shade? You get the idea. So tonight we're going to talk about where will the focal points be, like the views and the vistas from your kitchen window, and where do you want to draw the attention? Can you take advantage of surrounding borrowed views, like your neighbor's gorgeous trees, for example, or a gorgeous meadow across the street? Start by thinking about, what do you want from a garden? What type of energy do you want to create? Consider what style you want your garden as you plan it. Do you want it to be formal or informal? I like to create spaces that include trees, grasses, shrubs, perennials, annuals, and bulbs, combining color combinations that I love. You'll see lots of purple. I think about fragrance, and especially a variety of textures, barks, and shapes, always looking to the color wheel for inspiration. Think about how will you maintain the garden, and how involved do you want to be in caring for it? Is it going to be a place to relax and your sanctuary, or do you want to be out there every day like me? When we start with basic design principles like form, line, texture, scale, light, function, and color, then we can break the rules. So think about using groupings of 3 or 5, which are preferred in both interior and garden design for a better, more pleasing balance. People are amazed at what we've created in 7 years. So I'll show you my process and the progression of this garden from its inception, literally to today. This is basically the 9th garden we've created, and they all started basically the same way. This garden, we started by laying out the design on a drone photo that a friend was nice enough at the time to shoot for us early on. Then we generally, designed the beds. I loved when I saw recently, I saw Chanticleer on the right and the left designed their tennis court garden with all those curves. And when I started, that's exactly what I wanted for this garden. Mine is in the middle. So I brought many shrubs and perennials from other properties, and yikes, what a nightmare trying to keep these all alive. I don't ever recommend doing this. They went in and out of the basement as the weather that April just absolutely did not cooperate, but the beds were still being prepared. We hired help this time to dig and amend the heavy clay soil, as time was of the essence, since obviously I had lots of material that had to get in the ground. I always prefer to start with trees since they take the longest to grow. And I literally stood in the kitchen to place these trees to help shield the neighbor's pool. This bed has undergone major changes since it was first planted, and I'd say it's unrecognizable. This is what it looks like today. So we established structure with arbors and obelisks and fountains and garden ornaments, that I've collected over many years at places like the Brimfield flea markets. Most of you have been there. Trade Secrets, Campo de Fiore in Sheffield, for example. So whether it's just an empty hanging basket, props, as Dan Benarsic of Chanticleer calls them, birdhouses, benches, or maybe just a seating spot. More bird feeders and houses, hose guides, an armillary, a fountain from Brimfield, a bird bath from a local sculptor who I did some photography for. That was a gift. Or just some whimsy, and of course, all those plant supports. A companion fountain and more metalwork from Brimfield here, a chair, and a wire hat that my neighbor recently found the wire hat for me so I could adorn the little chair. So non-living elements in the garden create fun moments. So don't just think about the architecture of trees or the color of flowers. When you start, think about how will you use the garden and why do you want one? Are you interested in flowers, vegetables, natives, a combination, or just greenery? Personally, I love flowers. So we bought our property in winter, which is always a challenge since there will always be unexpected surprises. So start by assessing the positives and the negatives. What is the sun, the shade, the water, the tree situation? And some of those things will not be readily apparent. How about the neighbors, the utilities, and the borrowed views? What type of soil do you have? And what style of garden are you creating? If necessary, send a soil sample to your local extension office for detailed information. For us, the surprise was water, water, and more water. On move-in day, the front yard was totally flooded. This doesn't show it. Here it is this spring. And as you can see, it has changed completely since we started. Gardens are ever changing and evolving. They are not stagnant at all, in my opinion. Things grow, they die, and we move on. Again, what style of garden are you creating, formal or informal? I prefer gardens that enhance not only your experience in the garden, but also help the environment by encouraging pollinators. Each type of pollinator requires certain plants to sustain it or to allow it to reproduce. And of course, that is a subject unto itself that I wouldn't even touch. So let's start right at the beginning of the year, winter here in New England. Winter is a time for us not only to regroup, but for our gardens to take a deep breath. But underneath the soil, of course, things never stop. Isn't this the best part of winter? Who doesn't love seeing cardinals? I have a window right near my service berry that the birds come to all winter. I create spaces visually. So I cut out photos to play with my designs. And I've seen others like Sarah Raven, known for her book, A Year Full of Flowers, do the same. And I have all these books that if you want to take a look at them, at least, I brought them over and they're on the table. I'm a visual person, so I don't design on my computer, but I do keep track of my plants on an Excel sheet and in binders. So I highly recommend Sarah's books. She has a multitude of them if you love gardening. She has lots of great advice by season. In winter, we start planning, vision boards, design inspiration, Pinterest, whatever it is you like to use. So this was something I was working on for a client to try to make the plan as easy to understand as possible. No fancy architectural drawings. This was not for an architect. This wasn't for somebody else to install. This was just for me to relay to a client who had no knowledge really of gardening particularly. Erin Benzacane of Floret Farm also does this. Her books are a real asset to any gardener. And if you're a gardener, you can get such inspiration from this woman. She is insane. You can follow her on Facebook, on Instagram, her many books, her website, her blog, and I have them linked actually in my Amazon store also. She has lots of books. You could visit botanic or public gardens for winter interest inspiration. Especially pay attention when you go to the bark or branching structure and evergreens, and go to ones near you. In other words, I wouldn't visit the Denver Botanic Garden for inspiration in Connecticut, but I would visit the New York Botanical Gardens or the Berkshire Botanical Gardens or Tower Hill, for example. So we gardeners get a bit of a break in winter, when we're looking forward to that, fresh green of spring, the riotous colors of summer, the warm hues of autumn, and then that quiet renewal of another winter. And your gardens should celebrate all the seasons. This was my very poor attempt at winter sowing. If you are not familiar with this, you use clear containers like water jugs. Thank you to every neighbor in the Johnny Cake Mountain area who contributed those containers with soil and plants to plant your seeds. You leave the top off so the snow and the rain get in. You poke holes in the bottom so it drains, and you leave them out in the elements. I see others have great success with this method. I really tried for 2 years, and now I've given up. So I'm not sure why, but seed starting indoors has worked much better for me, so I'm gonna stick to that. Now I have a nice seed starting setup in my basement with lights. I talk a lot about winter interest on my YouTube channel, and since here in Connecticut, obviously, it's winter for many months. So think about using bark, weeping elements, structures, unique forms, and branching that will add interest all throughout the winter. Here are the seed heads of 9-bark, covered in ice, right outside our bedroom window. But don't forget about trees and shrubs that have berries that provide and extend the season, like the brandywine viburnum, crabapples, winterberries, and hawthorn trees. They really do help extend the season. The fruit on the Coosa dogwood. So consider, do you need a lawn for entertaining or play? Do your kids or your grandkids need a place to run around? Or maybe you guys just play cornhole or football. Do you spend a lot of time outside? Grassy areas, though, are becoming a thing of the past for environmental reasons. They take a lot of chemicals and water to maintain, and especially these days, we know climate change is here to stay. Your garden should be a reflection of your home and your lifestyle. So think about that style. I prefer an informal cottage style garden, as Gertrude Jekyll did. She used a profusion of plants in great swaths of color. But you might want a formal garden, like this example, with its linear lines, manicured parterres, clipped hedges, and structured plants. Informal gardens like mine have curved beds and paths and very few hard lines. So very briefly, I want to talk a little bit about the color wheel and color theory. So the basic principles of design, along with the color wheel and color theory, can help us design our gardens. The color wheel makes those relationships of colors very easy to use. So let's start there. In most gardens, perennials and shrubs do the bulk of the work. So plan those first. But annuals allow us to change things up every year and introduce and try new color schemes. Before committing to new plants, consider how one color plays with other colors in your overall landscape. Consider the color of your house. Now, I'm not going to get all technical here, but just a reminder that the primary colors are red, blue, and yellow, from which all other colors are derived, just like we learned in grade school. So there are infinite ways to combine these colors for a calming effect or a very vibrant effect. There are 4 main categories of color combinations that we can select from when designing our gardens. So you can see monochromatic, it's obviously one color. Analogous is colors next to one another on the color wheel, complementary colors across from one another, and then triadic colors. But don't forget about neutral colors. They play a very big role, like white, silver, gray, brown, and black. Even green can be used to tone down other colors. So think about things like lamb's ear, dark leaf eucharas, astilbes, hostas, 9-barks, for example. So monochromatic color schemes. They use variations on a single color, and they're very easy to look at. These are tone on tone plus some white and black. And cool colors can influence the mood of a garden, obviously. Blues and greens, tend to be considered cool colors. We find them relaxing and calming. And they change the perception of depth as cool colors tend to recede. Maybe you'll use all the shades of red violet, for example. So here's a practical application. Klaus Dalby, the king of color and tulips, tends to use a lot of monochromatic schemes. If you don't follow him, again, this is an amazing gardener that you really would like to follow, both on Instagram and I think he's on Facebook too. His container creations and combinations are beyond inspiring. Analogous colors are next to each other on the color wheel, like yellow to orange. So warm colors like red, yellow, orange tend to excite and invigorate us, and they appear to come forward in the garden. So aim to create unity, though, by repeating colors or textures in various borders to draw your eye around and throughout. Analogous colors, here red violet, red and red orange. So here you can see tulips in an analogous color combination. This is from Mount Cuba, I believe, in Delaware. Complementary colors are across from one another, like yellow and purple or blue and orange. So you can soften the effect of these by introducing neutrals. Here you see muscari and daffodils, purple and yellow, and of course the green leaves. Now, when planting your colors, remember flowers aren't in bloom all season. So typically, if you planted black-eyed Susans or helianthus for a dark yellow, accent in late summer, these bloom later in the year. So you would need something else to fill that color void, like daffodils or daylilies earlier in the season. Winter clearly exposes the bones that have been established. In my garden, it's the bark of the paperbark maple. On the left, Acer griseum, 9 barks in the center, and the river birches on the right, as well as hawthorns, evergreens, and conifers. The grasses, they sway in the wind. The sedum looks great when it's covered, with a layer of snow. Snow? What snow? We didn't have any snow last year. And who knows what this year is going to bring, because it doesn't sound like maybe all that much. So 2 years ago, we had to address our serious water issues. And major hardscaping went in to create a French drain under a riverbed and stone path. You have any questions? Don't ask me, ask my husband. Just a note here that the trumpet vine and the Joe Pye weed that you see on the left are gone. New evergreens for winter interest were added recently in this bed, including a new pine, juniper, a hinoki cypress, as well as a new weigela just for fall color. Also consider different textures like the sword-like leaves on things like irises or hakanakloa. Gardens should provide places for the eye to rest and catch up. The background layer frames the smaller or the lower plants, much like designing a living room. You start with the major pieces, like the sofa, and then you pop in the support pieces, like the pillows or the coffee table. A garden is the same. Here, the rose that's not blooming, but the dahlia is, at the moment, is backed up by the loosestrife. So in preparation for my first Garden Conservancy Open Garden Day, where I met Cheryl, and the launch of my YouTube channel, I wanted to show 3 different ways that you could start a garden from scratch. I should have had my head examined. Here you see the location of one of those beds. I started by trying out different combinations of plants, just cutting out different pictures, and then I drew it out to scale. Absolutely crazy. We started by drawing the beds out on the grass. You can use, string, rope, a hose, play with your shape. Anything that works makes it easy. These all needed the grass removed, the soil prepped, a lot of work to prepare for the new trees, shrubs, and perennials. This first bed was going to receive full-size trees and shrubs and raised beds. So here you can see the raised beds went in first. A full-size pine tree, 2 cryptomerias, a paperbark maple, a rose of Sharon, hydrangeas, and then 2 days before we got our large trees, it was freezing cold that night. So the joys of gardening. I always prefer to start with the major evergreens and the large trees, starting with the largest that we can afford. They immediately give structure to the garden. So here is the bed now 1 year later. Of course, in winter, we're dreaming, we're planning. There are always garden tasks, weather dependent, of course. All those seed catalogs, the garden books and magazines to check out with our Post-it notes all over them, get our thoughts and our plans organized. And hopefully you've taken photos so you can review what might need changing or updating. We start seeds. In our garden, we don't start pruning till March. We're in a zone, well, now we're in a zone 6, they say, but we do cut pussy willow branches for forcing and red twig dogwood branches for decorating. I keep a journal, lots of journals, to make notes on what is and what isn't working, and I find it very helpful. Do you need a soil test? Make sure you know your zone and your first and last expected frost dates. This year, they said ours was going to be October 12th. Obviously, that hasn't happened, but I won't speak too soon because who knows what next week will bring, right? Don't forget to plant things that have winter interest, like witch hazel and hellebores. Clethra, maybe, with its just great branching structure here covered in ice. So late winter sees the hellebores starting. These are just from a client's garden there where I did some photography. This year, I added lots of hellebores to my garden. Not sure what took me so long to add these beauties because they are amazing. The other 2 beds were planted a little differently. This bed connected the 2 hawthorn trees that we had already put in, creating a secondary path. So that was always in my original design. You can see the yellow highlighted lines are my intended paths. So finally, I got it last year. So here you can see I had, an overall plan with, intended ideas for paths and all that kind of stuff. And the bed here is cut out. The grass has been removed. All the new beds needed compost and topsoil and rototilling. The soil was rock hard as we were trying to dig these plants. We literally I had the hose, my husband had the auger. That's how hard it was. It was really difficult. So this year, we tried the no-dig method by laying down cardboard and mulch and then letting it break down for a new bed that we're making. But last year, we really couldn't wait. And I know there are pros and cons to both methods, to each his own, whatever works for you. I always like to place the plants, live with my design for a few days, even at a client's, to see if that's the design the way I really want it. Sometimes things look different on paper than they do when you actually get them in this space, and I'm sure you've all experienced that. In this bed, I wanted to show that you could use just like 1 to 3-gallon shrubs, grasses, and perennials, but no other full-size material. I mean, the 2 hawthorn trees were already there, but nothing else. So I planned for shape and texture, good contrast with the plants, that last through most of the season, like, spirea and grasses, agastache, nepeta, cotinus. So here, early stages, the plants are in place. But remember, it takes 3 years for plants to come into their own. As they say, first they sleep, then they creep, then they leap. And finally, everything was planted and mulched. So here's the path we ended up with for this bed. And here it is today, 1 year later. The last new bed we made was an extension of our original long spruce bed that I showed you in the beginning. Here, we basically started with just 3 existing small shrubs, and you can see in the picture there, and then we just added perennials and annuals. No shrubs were added. As the season progressed, I did add some small hydrangeas and daisies and grasses for more 3-season interest. If possible, use a background of evergreens if you have one. It really allows other plants to stand out and be framed against, that darker background. Finally, spring, the time for the garden to wake up with its fresh scents and pastel colors. So this year, we decided to get a greenhouse. And it wasn't going to work where I originally intended, sadly. Measure twice, cut once, as they say. So the plan was to put it here in this bed, which meant rearranging this entire bed again. And I have to give my son and husband kudos for their extreme patience in putting this together. In order to get the greenhouse in, we had to completely rework this bed on both sides. And I have since just given away the daylilies and the black-eyed Susans that you can see, but who doesn't love pass-along plants? So this is the other side. Also come spring, the pollinators show up, the birds are happy, the process begins all over. We are a necessary part of helping the pollinators thrive. Different pollinators use different host plants to feed and reproduce. There's something new every day to see if you've planned for a long season using the succession planting method, where one plant takes over after another is finished, as well described by the famous Christopher Lloyd. Have a plan. We all get distracted when garden centers open with all those plants, and the temptation is overwhelming. But don't forget to visit those garden centers throughout the whole season, because plants and shrubs look different as the year goes on. Something that blooms in fall does not look amazing in the spring, typically. Frankly, though, I don't always have a plan when I come across something I love, just saying. I break my own rules all the time, so be flexible. My husband always says, "Where's that going?" And I say, "I don't know, I'll figure it out." We start planting our containers, but we don't plant them out too early, as we can still have frost even in early May, as we did this year. So be prepared to cover your containers, your tender annuals, or those macrophylla hydrangeas that bloom on old wood. Our typical frost date this year was supposed to be May 1st, but I safely say Memorial Day. We have spent many a night running out to cover tender plants in early spring. I found that my roses do better in containers. I don't have good luck with them in the ground. And this is just a container with some begonias. In early spring, though, the white blossoms of the serviceberry autumn brilliance, a charming, small, really underutilized flowering tree, springs to life. It's interesting in all 4 seasons. It's zone 4 through 9. It typically gets 15 to 25 feet tall and wide. It attracts birds. The white flowers are followed by edible fruit in June that the birds love, and it has great orange-red fall color. It thrives in full sun to partial shade, and what more can you ask from a tree? It's a native. As spring progresses, you can see a variety of colors and textures as the plants develop. So try to incorporate some variegated foliage, yellow-green foliage into your beds for accents. Things like Japanese forest grass, Hakanakloa, or maybe variegated irises, or here you can see a yellow-green hosta and some heucheras, purple heucheras. We have that serviceberry underplanted with gooseneck loosestrife. Don't plant this unless you have room for it to spread. We are always pulling it out. It was the biggest mistake I think I made, besides bee balm in my yard. There's also heucheras, like I said, hostas, hellebores, Solomon seal, and it still be underneath there. So finally, all those bulbs that we planted in the fall are coming up. All 960. Right now, I think I have over 1,000 sitting in my basement. Of course, bulb flowers are not all in bloom exactly at the same time. Best laid plans for the combinations that we wanted. So prepare for another plant's foliage to cover the dying leaves of things like daffodils and alliums. Don't cut or tie up those leaves. They bring energy to the bulbs for next year's growth. Sorry. Also, a tip I learned from Fergus Garrett at Great Dixter. Think about popping early bulbs like snowdrops in the open spots before the perennials come up, so you can get multiple seasons of interest with no extra work. That's my plan for this fall. Think about bulbs that come back yearly in your zone. If you haven't ordered your bulbs yet, you may be out of luck. They do sell out really fast. You can buy them right there, absolutely, because I have a lot of those right there. I buy most of mine from Color Blends, and they're right here in Connecticut, which is great. If you need other sources, I can give you some ideas. So here's one of the inspiration pages I made as an outline for what I'm planting this fall. last year the tulips went in containers, mostly just because of our vole issues, and when they were done, we pulled them out and put in annuals. There's something so dreamy about the striking beauty of the blue lilac creeping phlox. So my plan is to underplant like roses and peonies with different plants. Camassia, lovely and planted in mass. Just an absolutely beautiful sight in late spring. April, also the time I start potting up dahlias. Get a little jump on the growing season and hopefully outsmart the bunnies. Last year got crazy since I was receiving plants for those new beds, and they were arriving right as I had to go away to my son's wedding. So we got a small hoop house to hold some of the perennials and the annuals since it was too cold to plant those out yet. Thank goodness for neighbors. I got to enjoy myself and not worry about all those plants. This year in March, I pulled the caladiums, the dahlias, the cannas, the calla lilies, the elephant ears out of the garage and forced them to start growing. They all came back, not what I was planning. Check out the collocations. You can't even see the spireas, the azaleas, and the aurelia under them. I can guarantee they will not go in this bed next year. As the spring flowers fade, the flag iris shines in this mid-season before that full-on explosion we get here in June. May is also a time for euphorbias with their yellow-green blooms, but be realistic though in your expectation of plants. Some perennials are just short-lived, so don't despair if something struggles after a few years. Just pull it out, it's a plant, and try something new. The peonies, the cotinus start flushing out. This is coral charm. I'm going to underplant my peonies this year, maybe with like snowdrops. I don't know, I have so many things to choose from. Here's another one of the inspiration pages that I made for what I'm planting this fall. You can see crocuses and tete-a-tete daffodils and snowdrops. The June garden, time for peonies like Sarah Bernhardt. But remember, don't plant the eyes too deep or they won't bloom. Of course, roses, like David Austin roses, Golden Celebration, and Princess Alexandra of Kent. New Dawn Climbing Rose with Clematis Elsa-Spath and Amethyst Falls Wisteria on this particular arbor. So Elsa-Spath is a group 2 clematis, which I've planted in several locations, along with another one called Diana's Delight on the right. The rule of thumb with these is that in late winter, early spring, you can cut them back to about like 6 to 8 inches to right above the point where it branches. At the branching point, you should see a little pair of bumps, and these are the buds, so you want to keep those. I deal with clematis wilt a lot, and I find nothing really works well with that. I just cut mine all the way back till I see new growth. The magnolia we selected is a yellow one called Sensation. And I chose this one because it blooms later. So hopefully we avoid that late frost that sometimes can damage the buds on some of the earlier blooming varieties. Late spring, we installed those raised beds, and sadly we've now raised them higher because I'm another year older. Then it was time, to plant all the vegetables and the lettuces and the perennials and the annuals and all those seeds that I started. So my first garden conservancy open garden day in June on my birthday was actually a huge success. We had loads of people and everybody was absolutely wonderful, had lots of great questions. So spireas, my favorite shrub. I love Spirea ogon in all seasons, but especially in June. Ogon is a deciduous shrub, hardy in zones 4 through 8. It's supposed to get like 3 to 5 feet tall and wide. I find I have to, where I have this next to a path, I do have to kind of, keep it trimmed up a little bit. They love full sun. They attract butterflies. In April, they are covered with absolutely lovely little white flowers, and their fall color is great, and they even tolerate deer. So here it is in the springtime and in the early fall. Our garden in late spring is an explosion of white and purple, taking center stage with the nepeta, the alliums, and the salvias. Nepeta Walker's Low, my favorite perennial, hands down. There are, of course, many new wonderful varieties to try, but Walker's Low has been a staple in my gardens. It's hardy in zones 4 through 8. It grows 2.5 feet tall, 3 feet wide. I usually do cut it back after its first flush, but not always. You know, I don't always follow my own rules. I find it blooms and it reblooms all year, nonstop, with those lovely lavender bloom, trumpet-shaped flowers the bees and the hummingbirds adore. Of course, the lilacs. But remember, prune your lilacs, your forsythias, your azaleas, your deutzias, your rhododendrons right after they finish blooming, or you risk cutting off next year's buds. More words of wisdom from Gertrude Jekyll, who said, "It must be remembered, as in all cases of planting flower borders, that they cannot be expected to show their full beauty the year after planting. Many of the most indispensable perennials take 2, 3, or even more years to come to their strength and beauty." I think we can all agree gardening requires patience. So for the first year or two, consider filling in areas with annuals. Like here you see Salvia Rock and Play in the Blues and Supertunia Silverberry, both from proven winners. Like Coleus, for example, striking foliage, no flowers necessary. Here it's absolutely putting on a show, and this was literally just like a day ago. Or maybe just a container filled with begonias. This year I changed that area along the driveway up a little bit. Still had 2 annual salvias, and it had Supertunia Vista bubblegum. I also host other events for groups like the Connecticut Daylily Society. They held their annual meeting in the garden last year, as well as some other groups. So my second favorite shrub is the 9-bark or the Physocarpus. I have at least 5 varieties on my property. They're hardy in zones typically 3 through 8. They vary in height anywhere from like 3 to 10 feet tall and as wide, depending on the variety. But in spring, they bloom with a pinkish white flower that you see here. They make a great hedge, but I really suggest you don't prune them. They have a natural vase shape that really does not return as well with pruning. I have both dark leaf varieties and several green leaf ones as well. They're very easy to take care of. They have gorgeous exfoliating bark, and they provide interest in all 4 seasons. By planting for a succession of flowers, your borders will have something interesting to see throughout all the seasons. Here, Sanguisorba or Burnet is the common name on the left. Verbena bonariensis floats above the other plants for a lighter feel in the space. Even though that's an annual, it readily recedes. Even the foxglove with its tall spikes provides a change in heights and draws you in. As I mentioned earlier, spireas are my favorite shrub. And again, I have many varieties, each a little different, but I have enough repetition so it doesn't get choppy looking. Things flow smoothly from one bed to the next, drawing your eye around. But don't forget, staking and supports are just a necessary part of some plants, like dahlias. So plan, but allow the plant some natural freedom. Don't tie it up. I love the supports I get from Old Farm Nursery in Lakeville, Connecticut, and I get asked in every video they appear in where they're from. You're welcome, Judy and Patrick. Or you can find them sometimes at Trade Secrets in May, and you can find them there. So then we move on to the heat of summer. July, the time for lilies, penstemon. I love the dark leaf stilbees like chocolate shogun, and they get even darker in more sunlight. The heucheras for their neat mounding habit that allows you to tuck them under larger perennials, shrubs, and trees. And of course, they now come in so many colors. I'm always adding more myself. After Memorial Day, you can safely start planting out your annuals. So late to come into flower are the perennial hibiscus. Just when you think they're gone, they suddenly come alive and they grow into these massive 3 by 6 foot wide plants like almost overnight. They love full apart sun, zones 4 through 9. This is Summerific Perfect Storm by proven winners. Don't be fooled if you don't see them before late spring. They're very late to emerge. In early spring, you can cut them down to about 6 inches and then stand back and watch them take off. They are gorgeous with their huge dinner plate flowers. August brings perennial flowers like Rudbeckia herbstone, black-eyed Susans, Henry Eilers, Helenium, gladiolas, things that grow pretty tall. So consider planting those at the back of your border or staking them up. September, glorious with its dahlias, all shouting, look at me, look at me. When you cut your dahlias for bouquets, remember, cut long stems. Don't go just down to the next leaf. It helps the plant create stronger branches and larger flowers. As last summer rolled on, with no rain like everybody else, we were challenged with watering and weeding and deadheading. Of course, I couldn't leave well enough alone, so I decided to redesign an existing bed. I gave away all my orange Primal Scream and Quanzo daylilies to people who had supported my open garden day. I needed to create a spot for a peace rose that was gifted by a friend in honor of a loved one who passed. This year, I made even more changes to this bed, and I just made more changes. So see the grass and the Joe Pye weed on the left? They're now gone as of the other day. The rose went into a container. I don't know why it was struggling in the ground. So we just added a new morning light grass, a new little Norway spruce called Poosh that gets only 2 feet tall and 3 feet wide. And we ended up removing, sadly, the Rudbeckia herbstone, which I love, but it kept flopping over even when I had it tied up. We also just added a Skyland spruce in the back for more evergreen interest, but it'll be a while before you can see it because in this case, I could not find the big one, so it's little. During all last year, I was also working on a large photography installation for a Middlesex orthopedic surgeon's new building. I am sadly a very good client. I have spent many years capturing the beauty of the seasons and landscapes, both locally and internationally. The theme for this project was the seasons in New England, a perfect subject for me. So as you know, as a gardener, things happen, right? This summer, a large branch of our catalpa broke off. And you can clearly see the hole in this photo. Well, we thought it would survive until another huge branch came off the tree. And no, it's definitely done for, and it's now been removed. So you can see the large void it leaves in this bed. We will be replacing it, or I should say John O'Brien will be replacing it with a Stewardia. And he said he'll install it after the first hard frost is when he usually digs trees. So finally, autumn with its glorious warm color arrives. The asters, like Radin's favorite aster here, perennial chrysanthemums. Personally, I don't love annual mums and asters. I feel they're very fleeting. I think they're good for porch decor though, but I don't use them in my beds. So another big project we tackled this year was to remove a large clump of Joe Pye weed and a trumpet vine that never bloomed, along with a ton of weeds in this bed. I had an extra weeping spruce left over from a client install, and I'm trying to add in even more evergreens and winter interest plants to the garden and pull out some of the perennials, trying to make my life a little simpler. So here we added a Maseski dwarf birch, some grasses, heucheras, coneflowers, and a mini twist pine that I also got from John O'Brien. And again, we just pulled out more perennials and added more evergreens from John for winter interest in this bed farther up. More big changes this year. We just pulled out the daylilies and the black-eyed Susans for a friend here to make room for a new flamethrower redbud and a Thuya Eastern Arborvitae called Linesville at an event at Hollister House. Don't ever let me go to a garden event because I never come home empty-handed. But unfortunately, rabbits are also eating some of the little yarrow that I keep trying to put in there, which is not very funny. Late summer, last year, it was time to prepare the garden for a 2-week vacation. My advice, never put your life on hold because you have a garden. things will survive. The maples, the grasses, the asters, the hydrangeas, the dahlias, the annuals really start to shine in autumn. The landscape is ablaze with color. Every day brings something new and amazing. Hydrangea paniculatas really color up in the fall. And if you don't cut the flower heads, they look lovely in winter too, of course, as long as they're not super heavy and if you've pruned them properly. They're great in bouquets and they work great as cut and dried flowers also. So here's the finished path in the hawthorn bed. So the hawthorns in the fall get loaded down with berries. And the robins descend on them en masse in late winter and literally, like in no time, annihilate them. The fiery contrast of the Coosa dogwood against the yellow-green of the Amsonia string theory, the grasses and the baptisia, again, the blue, the red, the yellow, the green, make for a harmonious combination. Remember the color wheel we discussed earlier? And if you watch Laura from Garden Answer, you've heard her say that whole thing a million times. Blue, red, yellow, green. It's in every video she does. So if you don't have a garden, you can fill in those spaces or just garden in a deck in pots. So this allows you to move your plants around. This year I had all my dahlias in pots. So I could move them into empty spaces, create color combinations that I liked. So here again, you can see the red, the blue, the yellow, the green, the color wheel applied. You can put lilies, hydrangeas, roses, gladiolas in pots, move them around and to fill in your blank spaces. I not only use containers, but I use grow bags all the time. They're breathable, they're easy to pick up and move around. I planted this year, I have my potatoes, vegetables, annuals. I have a lot of things in grow bags this year. And they're great for being able to give people plants too. I've lost count of how many containers I have actually. So nothing says fall more than oak leaf hydrangeas. The fall color is amazing, but don't prune them. These guys bloom on old wood, so try to place them where they don't need pruning. So look at that color. I have Hydrangea corsifolia Alice. I have them next to sedum, a Colorado blue spruce, some spireas and grasses. Again, red, blue, yellow, green, the color wheel. So I tried planting some cool flowers via the cool flower method by Lisa Mason Ziegler last fall. I might do it again, I think, this year. I'll try anything once or twice. And in March, they were still alive. You know, this is where you plant hardy annuals in the fall, you know, depending on which ones are hardy in your zone. Things like larkspur and bachelor buttons for us, scabiosas. Hardy annuals thrive in cool conditions, and they are like perennials in that they have a hardiness zone. So you can start them in the fall, and then they will basically sit there over the winter, and come spring, when the temps warm up, they'll start growing. You can direct seed many of these, or you could start them from transplants if you would have probably started them at least by mid-August here. So I did cover the bed with some frost cloth when it was really cold, but there are a lot of different varieties, and I have Lisa's book here so you can see the list of what's actually hardy in our area. Her book, Cool Flowers, very useful guide. She goes through every single plant page by page if you're interested in trying this method. Then it was time to start putting the garden to bed. We stopped fertilizing in late summer. You know, we keep deadheading. We don't plant anything that, you know, won't survive in our zone. We cut down plants like Queen of the Prairie, you know, which kind of prolific in our gardens, keeps spreading. And I made my husband build us towers to support the Queen of the Prairie and some of the tall grasses. Then holiday decorating begins. And, you know, some of the containers, you know, they're still going strong. So we just swap out some of the plants that are toast, you know, and we pop in things like pansies or, you know, kale or just some gourds to extend the season. Then it's on to potting up amaryllis, you know, for the holidays and winter color. Pink Surprise was still blooming in March. This goes for new bulbs and the ones that we have kept from last season. They're really easy to save and they can be expensive. Last year, I tried planting garlic for the first time. I did a variety called Music. from a very good farmer friend who grows thousands of garlic a year. And I will definitely be doing it this year. He just brought me 100. Then again, it's winter. Then it's time, dig up the dahlias, the cannas, the elephant ears, take in the containers, maybe plant tulips in them instead. In the ground, go the tulips and the alliums, the hyacinths, the daffodils, in preparation for next spring's spring color. We use a power planter auger. It makes holes that 5 to 6 bulbs each can fit in. It saves us a ton of time versus planting one by one. I do have a smaller auger that I use for the large allium bulbs though, because those are planted singly. Don't ignore though, trees and shrubs with colored appealing bark, like you see here, the red twig dogwood and the Salix hakura nishiki, or things like Acer griseum and river birches and 9-barks for winter interest. But with the red twig dogwoods or the yellow twig dogwoods, make sure you trim out the old wood every year. The new growth is what has the best color, and it's great to cut it for winter arrangements. Also, things like, rhododendrons, azaleas, hellebores, epimediums, these are not deciduous, so they're great for winter interest. If you can remember, cut your herbs and freeze them, before your first frost to use over the winter. I use Margaret Roach's method from A Way to Garden. She used to work for Martha Stewart, if you're familiar with her, and you can find this information on her website. She also has a book that I have sitting over there you can check out. Then I have my herbs that I grew all winter, like parsley and chives and thyme and tarragon and rosemary. Basil gets made into pesto unless you have a way to freeze it that I don't know about. Last year, we turned the front fountain into a winter container with dogwood branches, a boxwood that we picked up pretty cheap at Home Depot, some dried hydrangeas, some winterberry branches, some evergreen branches, and some giant pine cones from, I think, Michael's. Then comes time to decorate for all the winter holidays, start to unwind and dream about what you want next year to bring. So we've come full circle. The garden magazines, our own journals, the seed catalogs are spread all over again. And we can't wait to start again. I have most of the books and items that I just mentioned actually in our Amazon store, and your support really does help our channel. But I also have them over here so you can just take a look at them. Thank you all very much for taking a visual tour through our garden. I'll be glad to answer any general questions that you might have. I don't know how to shove that down.
There's one question.
Okay. So there's a question online. Were you able to get rid of the trumpet vine? I have one that keeps coming back from a very long time ago. Well, I guess we'll see. We did drag it up completely. I think, did you cut it up completely? Yes. So we think we got it out completely. But I don't know why. In 3 years, I literally had one trumpet flower. That was it. I don't know what, I fertilized it. I tried cutting it back every year. I have no idea why it didn't bloom. Do you do anything to insulate your tulip planters over the winter? The tulip planters that I did last winter, I kept in the hoop house because I didn't have the greenhouse yet. I had them in a hoop house underneath our deck. They were covered with hay. And for the most part, they did really well all year. Most of them did pretty well. There were a few that I've got to say that they just didn't work. I did the whole, Klaus Dalby shows you the whole lasagna planting thing. I don't think that worked real good for me. Things are worth trying. You never know what's gonna actually happen. Does anybody have a question? Are there any other questions that I didn't see there? Okay. Okay. No? Well, thank you very much. Oh, go ahead.
When you talked about putting the cardboard down
Mhm.
in the soil,
Mhm.
did that work for you? Did you leave it like the year before?
You know what? It actually breaks down pretty quickly.
Does it?
Yes, we that bed that you saw, we've actually already planted some stuff in it. And I'd say it's only been there a couple months. Now we actually just did this same method in an area we're extending that hawthorn bed a little bit. because I kind of went crazy at O'Brien Nursery. And, you know, it's like, okay, where are these things going? Because it's so easy to do, right? So it's like, okay, we're gonna make this bed a little wider. So we put the shrubs in, but then we put the cardboard and the mulch around them. And then next spring, we'll be able to do a little bit more.
So it will break down. If I put it down
It
now,
really does break down. Yeah. You could also use like contractor paper. You don't have to use necessarily cardboard. Yeah, you could use paper, which makes it a little easier to maneuver around. Yeah, but it really does work. Yeah,
For the weeds underneath, right?
it does. It kills the grass. It kills everything. Yeah, it's great.
I know we have a big problem with farmers. Mold, gym balls, rabbits, deer. Are there things that you can plant that are at those naturally balanced?
Repeat your question. So
Yeah. Yeah, he asked, we have a lot of trouble with animals. Critters, not animals. You know, we have a lot of bears and foxes and, you know, all that kind of stuff in Burlington. We don't have a lot of deer in our particular yard, but we have a lot of trouble with voles and moles and rabbits. Last year we had a lot of trouble with chipmunks that we actually got little traps and made little things for them to climb up and, you know, drop in, you know, buckets or whatever. I'm always looking for suggestions. Frank wanted to know, are there plants that you can plant? There are plants that are deer technically and rabbit resistant. Deer, if a deer is hungry, they're going to eat anything. It doesn't matter. Rabbits, you know, things that I know that the rabbits are going to go after, coneflowers, very often they eat my coneflowers, they eat my yarrow. I try and spray those things, but is there really, you know, are there plants that they're just going to leave alone? Not really. Sorry. Anybody else? Yeah.
I missed what you did out and I for your.
Oh, I have one had garlic in it until like July, and then I put vegetables in there and gladiolas. The other big one had tomatoes in it, and then the raised beds in the front, for the most part, all had flowers in them, seeds that I started and stuff. In the wooden raised beds, they're all soil. When we put in the galvanized ones that we got from home, we actually got those from Home Depot. We tried the yuga culture method. So the bottom of those, we did actually throw tons of branches in the bottom. We didn't fill it up like halfway, but we had a fair amount in there. So far, I've got to say, I haven't seen as much of it break down as I thought would have already happened. But eventually that will break down and we'll have to keep adding more soil. I do use like Espoma land and sea compost and raised bed mix. So, you know, especially next spring, I will be adding more soil to those beds. But so far those particular beds really have not broken down as much as I thought. But the other beds are full of Espoma raised bed planting mix.
One more commitment. You could play gooseneck.
Oh, if you could plant gooseneck loosestrife in a raised bed, would it be contained? Good luck. No, I don't think so, because I think it would find its way out personally. But anybody else? Is that okay? Got it. Yeah.
When you have the pianos and the elevators coming in, November in your garage and the garage like much longer than
yeah, the question was, you know, when I bring in the cannas and all that kind of stuff, like where do I put them? Do they go in the garage? The dahlias go in the garage, which I'd say stays between like 50 and 55, 50 and 60. Yeah, we don't usually have freezing in our garage. It is on, you know, it's attached to the house. So obviously, while it's not heated, it's not unheated either. I don't usually leave those outside. I have put them in the basement in the past. Last year, I had the best luck with my dahlias in the garage. In the past, I have tried to put them in the basement, and frankly, I thought it was too warm. Right now, my amaryllis are in the basement, for that, like 8 to 10 week dark, period until I'm gonna bring them out and repot them. I've actually already cut down the colocaceas, and I've actually dug up the calla lilies, to break my heart, because those were actually pass along plants. The calla lilies, normally I just pull those up, I brush off the dirt, I cut off the leaves, I put them in a box with some vermiculite, and I put them in the basement underneath, like a shelf. And it's never really freezing cold in our basement. Does that help? Okay, great. Anybody else? Am I missing anything from here? Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it.